Ambassador Jack Murphy believed that 90% of all diplomatic incidents could be solved with a cold beer and a terrible joke. The other 10% usually required 2 beers and an even worse joke. This philosophy had served him well throughout his career as Earth's lead diplomat to the stars, earning him both a reputation for getting results and an impressive collection of alien brewing techniques. Today, however, was rapidly shaping up to be one of those rare occasions where even his extensive beverage collection might not cut it. "Let me get this straight," Murphy said, leaning back in his chair and studying the holographic projection of the Vortaxian ambassador hovering above his desk. "You want Earth to what now?" The alien's 4 eyes blinked in perfect sequence, a gesture Murphy had come to recognize as their equivalent of an eye roll. "As I have now explained 3 times, Ambassador Murphy, we require Earth's immediate and unconditional submission to Vortaxian authority. Your species will be granted the privilege of serving as a protectorate under our benevolent guidance." Murphy took a long sip from his coffee mug, which definitely didn't contain coffee. Right. And we're supposed to do this because we are clearly your superiors in every meaningful way," the Vortaxian replied, their crystalline skin glinting with what Murphy assumed was smug satisfaction. "Our civilization has existed for over 50,000 of your Earth years. We have mastered faster than light travel, developed technology beyond your comprehension, and established a presence in 17 galaxy clusters. You, on the other hand, only achieved spaceflight within the last century." Murphy scratched his chin thoughtfully. "And what makes you think we'd be interested in this arrangement?" The Vortaxian's translator struggled to convey their tone of patronizing patience. "Ambassador Murphy, surely you understand that resistance would be futile. Our military capabilities far exceed anything your primitive species could muster." "See, that's where you might be making a tiny mistake," Murphy said, pulling out his personal tablet and calling up a particular file. "According to my notes from our first contact briefing, your species evolved on a planet with roughly 1/3 Earth's gravity and no major predators. Your ancestors' biggest survival challenge was deciding which naturally occurring mineral deposits to eat first." "That is correct," the Vortaxian confirmed proudly. "We developed our superior intellect precisely because we were not forced to waste energy on primitive survival concerns." Murphy nodded sagely. "And how many of your worlds have what you'd consider dangerous wildlife?" "None, of course. We eliminated such inefficiencies long ago." "Right," Murphy took another sip. "So you've never had to figure out how to survive on a death world where literally everything is trying to kill you?" The Vortaxian's skin rippled in what might have been confusion. "I failed to see the relevance." "Just making conversation," Murphy said cheerfully. "Tell me more about this submission thing. What exactly would it entail?" What followed was a 15-minute lecture on the various ways Earth would benefit from Vortaxian oversight, including but not limited to the replacement of our chaotic democratic systems with their perfectly ordered hierarchical society, the privilege of providing manual labor for their mining operations, and the honor of having our culture systematically erased and replaced with theirs. Murphy listened patiently, occasionally nodding and making interested noises. When the Vortaxian finally finished, he set down his mug and smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile. "That's a really interesting proposal," he said. "Let me respond with a counteroffer. How about absolutely not?" The Vortaxian's skin shifted to a deep purple. "You dare refuse our generous offer?" "Oh, I dare. And here's some free advice. You might want to reconsider this whole submit or else approach. Being civilized is something we do by choice, not necessity. You really don't want to see what happens when we decide it's no longer worth the effort. Your primitive threats do not concern us, Ambassador Murphy. You have 24 Earth hours to reconsider your position before we begin enforcement procedures." The hologram flickered out, leaving Murphy alone in his office. He sighed, reached for his communicator, and pressed a button. "Hey, Command? Yeah, it's Murphy. Remember that contingency plan we discussed? Looks like we're going to need it after all. And maybe send over Commander Rodriguez, you know, the one who makes me look diplomatic by comparison." The Galactic Council chamber was exactly what you'd expect from a society that considered efficiency to be next to godliness, meaning it was entirely devoid of anything resembling comfort, style, or basic ergonomic considerations. Murphy's chair, clearly designed for a species with a very different understanding of what constituted a sitting position, was doing interesting things to his spine. He made a mental note to bring a cushion next time. Assuming, of course, there was a next time. The emergency session had been called at the Vortaxians' request, and the chamber was packed with representatives from every major spacefaring civilization in the sector. Ambassador Prim Proper, and yes, that was their actual name, which told you everything you needed to know about Vortaxian culture, stood at the central podium, their crystalline form shifting through various shades of righteous indignation. The humans have rejected our most generous offer of protection and guidance, they announced to the assembled delegates. This level of ingratitude is unprecedented. Murphy raised his hand. Point of order, you can't reject an offer that was actually a demand backed by threats. That's not how offers work. Silence, General Zapp. The Vortaxian military commander thundered from their position beside Prim Proper. Their skin had taken on the deep purple shade that Murphy was starting to recognize as their version of anger. You will speak only when addressed directly by your betters. See? That right there, Murphy said, pointing at the general. That's exactly the kind of attitude I was talking about in my report, which, by the way, I notice none of you have actually read. The Cerebian representative, a floating mass of tentacles and eyes, waggled disapprovingly. The human's point is irrelevant. Their species is clearly too primitive to recognize the honor being offered to them. My own research indicates they still engage in physical combat sports for entertainment. This prompted a wave of horrified murmuring from the assembled delegates. Murphy took advantage of the distraction to shift position in his torture device of a chair. The Cerebians are correct, declared Ambassador Prim Proper. We have compiled extensive evidence of human barbarism. They continue to maintain military forces despite achieving spaceflight. They permit their young to engage in dangerous recreational activities. They even deliberately consume chemical substances that alter their mental states. You mean coffee? Murphy asked innocently. Because I've got some bad news about that one. Furthermore, General Zapp interrupted. Their response to our generous ultimatum was to suggest that we, and I quote, fuck around and find out this is clearly the language of savages. More gasps of horror filled the chamber. Murphy couldn't help noticing that none of the delegates seemed particularly interested in asking what that phrase might mean. The council leader, a being that resembled nothing so much as a very serious desktop lamp, extended their luminescent appendage toward Murphy. Does the human representative wish to defend these accusations? Defend them? Murphy grinned. Heck, I can add to them. Did you know we invented parkour? That's where we run at walls for fun. Oh, and we deliberately breed plants that cause pain when we eat them. We call them spicy foods. Great with beer. The chamber erupted in chaos. Murphy watched with increasing amusement as various delegates tried to outdo each other in expressing their shock and dismay at human barbarism. The Vortaxians, he noticed, were looking particularly pleased with themselves. Finally, the council leader restored order by increasing their luminescence to nearly blinding levels. We have heard sufficient evidence. The Council hereby declares humanity to be a Class 3 primitive species, requiring immediate supervision and cultural reformation. The Vortaxian Empire is granted full authority to implement these measures. Now hang on just a minute, Murphy started to protest, but General Zapp cut him off. The decision is final, human. Your species will submit to our authority, or we will demonstrate why resistance is futile. Our fleet stands ready to begin enforcement procedures. Murphy stood up, straightening his jacket. Well, folks, I can't say I didn't try to warn you. But since you're all so determined to learn things the hard way, he pulled out his communicator. Commander Rodriguez, looks like it's your turn to handle diplomacy. The council leader's glow flickered uncertainly. What are you doing? Oh, just calling in our cultural advisor, Murphy said cheerfully. She's got some fascinating insights about human nature that she's dying to share with you all. In fact, I believe she's prepared a practical demonstration. As if on cue, every screen in the chamber lit up with a priority alert. The Vortaxian delegation's smug satisfaction began to fade as they read the incoming reports. Commander Maria Rodriguez had a reputation in diplomatic circles, and that reputation could be summed up in 5 words: oh no, not her again. When Murphy solved problems with beer and bad jokes, Rodriguez solved them by calculating exactly how many warships it would take to remove said problems from existence. She was currently standing in Murphy's office, reading the Vortaxian reorganization plan for Earth's colonies with an expression that suggested she was mentally converting population centers into target coordinates. "They want to relocate our entire mining operation on Titan," she said flatly. "Because, and I'm quoting directly here, humans clearly lack the intellectual capacity to properly utilize such valuable resources." Murphy, who had traded his not coffee for actual coffee desperate times and all that, nodded. "Keep reading. It gets better. Better like a root canal gets better. Or better like that time you tried to teach the Arcturians about practical jokes and nearly started a war." "In my defense," Murphy said, "how was I supposed to know their species couldn't grow their tentacles back?" Rodriguez ignored him, continuing to read. Her eyebrows climbed steadily higher until they threatened to escape her face entirely. "They're planning to optimize New Singapore's atmospheric processes. The ones we specifically designed to terraform hostile environments. The same processes that half the galaxy has been trying to copy for the past decade. Apparently, they think we just got lucky with the design." Murphy took another sip of coffee. "Like a bunch of monkeys accidentally typing out Shakespeare." "And they've already started?" Rodriguez asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Yep, sent in their first wave of administrative assistance ships this morning. Currently parked themselves right in front of the Titan orbital stations, demanding immediate compliance." Rodriguez set down the tablet with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for armed explosives. "You know what this reminds me of?" "Do tell." "At that time in Brazil when we were kids. Remember those tourists who kept ignoring the warning signs at that nice beach resort? The ones who thought they knew better than the locals about which areas were safe for swimming?" Murphy winced. "The ones who found out why we have signs saying warning bull sharks in 17 languages. "Exactly," Rodriguez smiled. It was not a nice smile. Some people just have to learn the hard way that warning signs aren't suggestions. She walked over to Murphy's desk and pressed a button on his communication panel. "Central Command, this is Commander Rodriguez. Initiate protocol, Honey Badger." Murphy choked on his coffee. "Honey Badger? Really? That's a bit excessive, don't you think?" "They called us primitive, Jack. They're trying to take over Titan. They insulted our atmospheric processes." She ticked off each point on her fingers. "And worst of all, they interrupted my vacation. I was this close to beating my personal record for consecutive hours spent doing absolutely nothing." The communication panel chimed. "Protocol Honey Badger confirmed, Commander. All units report ready. Awaiting your final authorization." Rodriguez looked at Murphy. "Last chance to try it your way." Murphy sighed and reached for his communicator. The Vortaxian ambassador's hologram appeared almost immediately, 4 eyes blinking in obvious irritation. "Ambassador Murphy, if you're calling to finally accept our generous—" "Actually," Murphy interrupted, "I'm calling to give you one last warning. As a courtesy, you understand. Because we're civilized like that." The ambassador's skin rippled with disdain. "More primitive threats. Not a threat. Just a friendly reminder that being civilized was always a choice for us, not a necessity." And right now he glanced at Rodriguez, who was already pulling up tactical displays. "Well, let's just say we're feeling a bit uncivilized. Your species has been officially classified as primitive by the Galactic Council," the ambassador sneered. "You have no choice but to." Rodriguez cut the transmission. "I think that counts as your fair warning." "They're really not going to like what happens next," Murphy observed. "That," Rodriguez said, "entering the final authorization code is entirely the point." Across the solar system, hidden stations began powering up. Orbital platforms that had been marked as atmospheric monitoring satellites dropped their camouflage, and in the depths of space, humanity's real fleet emerged from what the Vortaxians had dismissed as random gravitational anomalies. It was time to show the galaxy exactly why Earth's wildlife had made humans so very, very good at surviving. The thing about humans, as the Vortaxian fleet was about to discover, is that we didn't survive on a death world by being bad at violence. We survived by being exceptionally good at it, then choosing to be nice anyway. The first sign that things weren't going according to the Vortaxian battle plan came when their ship's sensors suddenly stopped working. All of them, simultaneously. "Impossible," General Zapp declared, watching their tactical displays dissolve into static. Their primitive technology couldn't possibly interfere with our superior systems. Funny thing about that, Rodriguez's voice came through on all channels, clear as day despite the Vortaxians' best encryption. We figured out quantum field disruption about 10 minutes after achieving faster than light travel. And Murphy, who had insisted on watching from the command center despite Rodriguez's protests that he'd just get in the way, raised his hand. I feel like I should point out that this would be an excellent time to reconsider your life choices. You dare? General Zapp's voice crackled with rage. Our fleet still outnumbers yours 100 to 1. About that, Rodriguez said cheerfully. Remember all those gravitational anomalies your sensors kept picking up? The ones you decided weren't worth investigating because, and I quote, primitive species couldn't possibly understand gravity manipulation. Right on cue, humanity's actual fleet dropped their gravitational cloaking. The Vortaxian tactical officers who were still capable of counting quickly revised their numerical advantage to a significant disadvantage. But those were listed as research vessels, one of the Vortaxian commanders protested. They are research vessels, Rodriguez confirmed. We're researching how many ways we can ruin your day, currently at 47 and counting. What followed was less of a battle and more of an impromptu demonstration of why you shouldn't judge a species by their diplomatic demeanor. The Vortaxian ships found their supposedly impenetrable shields disrupted by what appeared to be modified mining lasers. Their advanced navigation systems were thoroughly confused by what they later discovered were repurposed atmospheric processors, proving that humanity's terraforming technology worked just as well for changing space as it did for changing planets. Did you know, Murphy commented as they watched the Vortaxian fleet trying to deal with the fact that space itself seemed to have decided to disagree with them? That we originally developed these techniques to deal with space sharks. Space sharks, the Vortaxian commander's voice was faint. Oh yeah. Turns out when you start terraforming planets, some of Earth's wildlife gets a bit ambitious. The dolphins were bad enough, but at least they're friendly. Space sharks, though, those guys hold a grudge. Rodriguez shot him a look. You're making that up. Am I? Murphy grinned. Why don't we ask our friends here if they'd like to stick around and find out? The Vortaxian fleet, displaying their first sign of genuine wisdom since this whole affair began, decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Their retreat might have been more dignified if their engines weren't being actively reprogrammed by what they had previously dismissed as primitive AI systems. You know what the really funny part is, Rodriguez said, watching the last Vortaxian ship limp away. We actually were holding back. Those were just our mining and research ships. The actual military fleet is still in dry dock. Should we tell them about the Space Marines? Murphy asked. Let's not. Some species just aren't ready to learn about the Australians. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, the assembled delegates were watching the tactical feeds in stunned silence. The council leader's glow had dimmed to a confused flicker. But your technology, your civilization, you were supposed to be primitive. Murphy, whose hologram had replaced the tactical display, shrugged. Fun fact, when you evolve on a planet where everything is trying to kill you, you get really good at making things that help you kill them back. We just decided it was more fun to explore space and make friends instead. Speaking of friends, he added, his expression growing serious, I believe we need to have a discussion about that Class 3 primitive species classification. The council leader's glow dimmed even further. Perhaps we were somewhat hasty in our judgment. Perhaps, Murphy agreed. Now, who's ready to learn about the human concept of a do-over? I brought beer. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 6 straight hours, which was roughly 5 hours and 50 minutes longer than Murphy had wanted to spend in his ergonomically challenged chair. He'd started solving this problem by bringing his own chair, much to the horror of the more traditionalist species present. Let me see if I understand this correctly, the Cerebian representative was saying. Their tentacles twisted into what Murphy had learned was their species' expression of extreme confusion. Your species has possessed advanced quantum manipulation technology for decades. Yet Murphy took a sip from his coffee mug, which had also scandalized the council. Apparently, consuming beverages during diplomatic proceedings was considered uncouth. He decided not to mention that he'd added Irish cream to this particular cup. And your atmospheric processors. are actually space-time manipulation engines that we use for terraforming because it's more efficient than traditional methods. Also, yes. And your mining operations could have stripped the entire Vortaxian fleet to its component atoms in about 15 minutes. Rodriguez chimed in from her position next to Murphy. She'd insisted on attending this session, claiming it was either that or she'd start testing humanity's new toys on random stellar phenomena out of boredom. That's accurate. We just prefer to use them for their intended purpose because, minerals are useful and war is expensive. The council chamber erupted in another round of concerned murmuring. Murphy was pretty sure he'd heard the phrase death world and madness at least 3 times. But why the council leader's glow had taken on a distinctly puzzled hue. If you possessed such capabilities, why maintain the pretense of being a developing civilization? Murphy leaned forward in his definitely not regulation chair. Have any of you ever heard of the Australian brown snake? Blank stares all around. Nasty little creature. Extremely venomous. But here's the thing, it doesn't want to bite you. It would much rather slip away and avoid confrontation. However, he raised a finger. If you corner it, if you threaten it, if you give it no choice, well, let's just say there's a reason Australian hospitals keep a lot of anti-venom on hand. I failed to see the relevance, the Vortaxian ambassador muttered from their newly assigned seat in the back row. The relevance, dear ambassador, Rodriguez said with a smile that made several delegates inch away from her, is that humanity is a lot like that snake. We're perfectly happy to be friendly. We enjoy trade, cultural exchange, and peaceful coexistence. We'll even pretend to be less advanced than we are if it makes everyone more comfortable. But if you back us into a corner, you demonstrate why your species survived a death world, the Cerebian representative finished, their tentacles drooping in understanding. Got it in one, Murphy confirmed. Though I have to say, watching your faces when we revealed our actual technology level was pretty entertaining. Commander, do you still have that recording of General Zapp discovering our quantum field generators? The one where they turned all the colors of the rainbow at once. Already sent it to the Diplomatic Corps Holiday Party Committee. The council leader's glow brightened suddenly. The mining colony on Europa, the one you claimed was struggling with basic ice extraction techniques, is actually the most advanced zero-point energy facility in known space. Murphy grinned. Yeah, we had fun coming up with excuses for why our power output readings were so inconsistent. My personal favorite was blaming it on space whales. Space whales? Oh, that one's actually real, Rodriguez said. Turns out cetaceans adapt really well to low-gravity environments. We've got a whole pod living in Europa's subsurface ocean now. They help maintain the quantum stabilizers. The chamber fell silent as the assembled delegates processed this information. Murphy took advantage of the pause to pour himself another coffee, making sure to maintain eye contact with the protocol officer who was clearly having fits about unauthorized beverages in the council chamber. Finally, the council leader spoke again. The council moves to immediately rescind humanity's Class 3 primitive species classification. Seconded, the Cerebian representative said quickly. A forest of appendages rose in agreement. Motion carried, the council leader declared. Additionally, we would like to formally request human assistance in updating our technological classification systems, as they appear to be. They paused, their glow flickering in what might have been embarrassment, somewhat inadequate. Happy to help, Murphy said cheerfully. Though I should warn you, that means you'll have to learn about our educational system. Ever wonder why we make our younglings solve abstract mathematical problems under time pressure, while simultaneously dealing with social hierarchy dynamics and biological development changes? The chamber erupted in horror once again. We call it high school, Rodriguez added helpfully. It's basically survival training for bureaucracy. The council leader's glow dimmed to a terrified flicker. Perhaps we should adjourn for today. Excellent idea, Murphy agreed, standing up. Commander Rodriguez and I need to go check on the space sharks anyway. You were joking about the space sharks, Rodriguez muttered as they left the chamber. Right. Murphy just smiled. Some things, he decided, the galaxy wasn't quite ready to learn about yet. 3 months after what historians would later call the Vortaxian incident, and what Murphy called Tuesday, the galaxy had settled into a new normal. It turned out that discovering your supposedly primitive neighbors were actually hyper-advanced space wizards who had just been humoring you required some significant psychological adjustment. Murphy sat in his office, his actual office, not the deliberately primitive one he'd been using for show, watching the latest batch of diplomatic requests scroll across his holographic display. The Arctarians want access to our terraforming technology, he noted, scanning through the list. Should we tell them it's just repurposed weather control systems we developed because we got tired of rain ruining our picnics? Rodriguez, who had somehow become a permanent fixture in diplomatic affairs, despite her best efforts to avoid it, snorted. Let them figure it out themselves. They're still trying to understand how we turned their impenetrable quantum barriers into modern art installations. To be fair, they do look lovely in the sunlight. Murphy paused on one particular request. Oh, now this is interesting. The Vortaxians are asking permission to send a cultural exchange delegation. You're kidding. Nope. Apparently, after we demonstrated how much technology we'd been hiding, they've become convinced that we must have some sort of secret superiority in every field. They want to learn the hidden mysteries of human civilization. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, propping her feet up on Murphy's desk. Should we tell them that our greatest technological achievements were mostly inspired by us being too lazy to do things the hard way? Probably not. Though I am tempted to introduce them to video games. Can you imagine their faces when they learn we created entire virtual worlds just for fun? Better not, Rodriguez said. Remember what happened when we showed the Cerebians cat videos? Murphy winced. The resulting 3-week emergency council session on the human capacity for weaponizing cuteness had been exhausting. A light flashed on Murphy's display, priority message from the council leader. He accepted the transmission, and the familiar glow filled his office. Ambassador Murphy, the council leader began, then paused. Is that a cat on your desk? Murphy glanced down at the orange tabby that had somehow materialized on top of his paperwork. Oh, that's just Chairman Whiskers. Don't mind him, he's the real diplomat in the family. I just handle the paperwork. The council leader's glow flickered rapidly, a sign they still hadn't quite adjusted to human humor. I see. We have received concerning reports about activity in the Antares sector. Something about humans introducing local species to something called caffeine. Ah, yes, Murphy nodded sagely. Cultural exchange program. Very successful. Did you know the Andromedans have already invented 16 new types of coffee? But the effects on local space-time are completely within acceptable parameters, Rodriguez cut in. Though I will admit, we didn't expect them to figure out how to weaponize espresso quite so quickly. Quite impressive, really. The council leader's glow dimmed to a worried flicker. The council is concerned about the rapid spread of human influences across the galaxy. Murphy scratched Chairman Whiskers behind the ears, earning a purr that somehow managed to sound smugly diplomatic. Look at it this way, would you rather we go back to pretending to be primitive? No, the response came so quickly it made Chairman Whiskers jump. No, that won't be necessary. We simply thought. Perhaps. Some guidelines. Tell you what Murphy said, reaching for his coffee mug. Why don't we discuss this over drinks? I've got this great new blend the Andromedans created. They're calling it Supernova Sunrise apparently. It actually causes minor temporal distortions if you drink it too fast. The council leader's glow took on a distinctly nervous quality. Perhaps we should adjourn for today. After the transmission ended, Rodriguez looked at Murphy. You don't actually have any Supernova Sunrise? Nope, Murphy grinned. But watching them try to figure out which human claims are jokes and which ones are real has become my favorite part of this job. You're a terrible person. I prefer the term creatively diplomatic, he picked up Chairman Whiskers, who had started batting at his display controls. Besides, we have to keep them on their toes somehow. Can't have the galaxy getting too comfortable, they might forget why we decided to be civilized in the first place. Speaking of which, Rodriguez said, checking her own display, the Vortaxians are asking about the space sharks again. Murphy's grin widened. Tell them the sharks are currently attending a diplomatic summit with the dolphins. That should keep them busy for a while. And so the galaxy continued to adjust to its new reality, where the most terrifying phrase in known space became the humans are being helpful because, as everyone had learned, When humans decided to help, it usually meant they'd been holding back something absolutely ridiculous all along. Chairman Whiskers, for his part, just purred. But then again, cats had mastered the art of being civilized by choice long before humans had even figured out space travel. Some species were just naturally good at keeping secrets,